And joining me now is Anita Hill. She's a lawyer and professor at Brandeis University. And over 30 years ago, she started a national discussion when she testified that then Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas sexually harassed her. Now we're looking at the Me Too movement some 30 years later. And Anita Hill joins me now. Professor Hill, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you for having me back.
Let me start with, go back to 1991, and we've had many conversations about this before. But you faced a torrent of attacks, criticisms, attempts to delegitimize, all these things. When you think about everything you went through, if a young woman came to you today and say, is it worth speaking out, how would you counsel her to do it? I know you would say it's always worth speaking out, but how would you counsel her to do it?
Well, I, first of all, do not give anybody a blanket answer. I mean, it really does depend on the circumstances of anybody coming forward. Mm-hmm. What they understand the process to be, because for some people, they don't have any idea what the process is, depending on the circumstances, what they expect from the outcomes, and whether or not they're going to have the support, in fact, to go through, which something that will very likely be a grueling experience. Mm-hmm. And so the counsel has to be individual. It has to fit what the victim wants and what they can reasonably expect to be the outcome. And that varies so much still.
You know, in our piece preceding our conversation, we had some young women who look at the Me Too movement in its current form and think, you know what, yeah, it mattered with some elite institutions, and it was an important movement for the elites, but for those of us living in anonymity, we're still being harassed. We're still going through this, and no one's out there protecting us. What do you say to that?
Harassment, they are absolutely right. Harassment has not ended in every corner. And I've talked about this before, and that's one of the shortcomings, I think, of the movement, that it hasn't been inclusive enough, that it hasn't reached into all of the corners and the places where harassment and sexual assault and abuse has happened. And so I think they are, really justified in feeling abandoned to some extent. I don't think that's the problem of the movement. I think that what they are realizing is that resistance to solving this problem is still out there. Mm-hmm. It is perhaps greater on the people who don't have visibility, who don't have power. It is most often greatest on those people, and that we all have to do more to reach them. And we even have to do more to reach them at a younger age. One of the things that we're not talking about enough is prevention. How do we prevent this from even becoming a part of someone's lived experience that can continue throughout a lifetime?
Look, this has to begin in adolescence, right? It begins with how we raise our boys and how we raise our girls, does it not?
Well, it absolutely. The behavior begins in adolescence. I mean, and any, and I talk about this in my book, which really takes us through a lifetime experience of this issue. Mm-hmm. And what we find is that it happens in elementary schools. It happens, about a third of the students in middle schools. And so the problem builds and builds. And what is important to recognize is that it's affecting not only direct victims, but it's affecting all of the people around them, because they're learning that this is something that you just have to put up with, or that the institution isn't going to do anything about. So it's why bother to complain? And we've got to send better messages to children than that, because what we're doing is, in essence, we're grooming them to expect that it's normal, or that it can't be addressed, or that nobody even cares enough to bother to address it.
I hear this from older women who will say to younger women, look, you just have to learn to deal with it. And that just feels defeatist, doesn't it?
Well, it absolutely is defeatist. That's a generational divide, if there is anything. But I'm sure there's some younger women who feel that way too, because that's what we're told. We are told that, you just have to put up with it. Don't make a big deal out of it. It's not really that bad. You'll get over it. Instead of telling our children, for example, when you're being teased or bullied or poked at or called names, instead of saying this is not supposed to happen to you, it shouldn't be happening, not only telling the girls who are often the victims, but also telling boys that this is not appropriate behavior. This is not a way of expressing interest in a person. It's not the way that you're supposed to treat anyone.
During your testimony in 1991, you were asked why, if he was treating you this way, you continued to work there and you continued to work for Clarence Thomas. And at the time you said, look, I don't have a good explanation, but we're sort of getting at this issue, which is a lot of women stay in a job or stay in a relationship because they feel trapped. Knowing what you know now and the Me Too movement, do you think you would have stuck? You felt you had no choice but to stick in that job back then, is that right?
I do feel like I had no choice, but let me also tell you, what I am tired of is hearing people say, why don't you just leave? Instead of saying to the person who is having this problem, that we can fix this problem for you. You shouldn't have to leave a job or a school or any kind of position that you're in because someone is behaving badly. I mean, we need to get over that notion and stop asking people, why don't they just leave? There are many reasons that people don't leave, but mostly people want to stay because they want to do the work that they're doing or they want to get the education that was promised to them when they enrolled in an institution.
Here we are looking at a Supreme Court that has never been more unpopular, never been less trusted. 2 of the 9 members of the Supreme Court were credibly accused of sexual assault. It's hard not to say that doesn't seem to contribute to the credibility of the court.
I'm sure it does. I mean, and I've heard it more and more. And I think in particular, people don't feel that they can trust this court, given the 2 justices that we're referring to, Justice Thomas and Kavanaugh, that we can trust these individuals to make unbiased decisions about what should happen when someone comes forward with a claim of sexual assault, sexual harassment, or other workplace violations. I mean, that really is just the sort of tip of the iceberg. I think what people understand, if these 2 individuals don't trust our lived experiences, then why should we entrust them to be able to give us justice or to mete out justice to any of us in these cases or other cases?
President Biden apologized to you. Do you think he gets it?
I'm not sure he gets it entirely, but he gets it, I think, enough to understand that the government, the leadership at all levels have a responsibility. He must know about the horrible rates of harassment and abuse that are coming out of our military and the incidents. He cannot be oblivious to that. He can't be oblivious to even the numbers that are coming out of our federal positions in government offices. So it is clear that we're not just talking about the Supreme Court being compromised. We're talking about our national offices, our judiciary system has incidents of harassment and abuse. We're talking about our government offices. We're talking about our military. And he must know of all of these things. And I think he knows enough about government and leadership to know that this change has to start from the top.
I was just going to say, is it fair to say if government can't change itself, then we can't expect the rest of society to follow suit?
There is no better model for us at this point than would be to see government really take a strong position on this and to begin to own it and take accountability for their role in changing it, not only in government, but throughout our systems, whether you're talking about our workplace systems or our educational systems or even our religious systems. I mean, look at how widespread this problem is. We're talking about a systemic problem on a societal level, and who better to get out in front and really lead on this than someone who has, the attention of the world.
Right. Anita Hill, professor from Brandeis University, among other things. Always appreciate getting your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.